Alrighty. So what we want to do today is we want to paint the desk. All right. Now the nice thing is this is going to be pretty much the same lecture we did for the last one. I am going to show you kind of two new features that are useful. Not necessarily you even have to use them, but it's good to know about them. So in this case, remember, we don't have to actually send our whole group over, right? We really want to actually send these objects independently, right? Because this is actually its own object, right? It was already combined. And remember, we UV and wrapped it combined, right? So if I just do a quick look at the UV editing, right? There's no overlap, right? This is all one object, and all the UVs are wrapped based on this whole object. None of those UVs are on top of each other. And the same thing here, right? This is its own object, the drawers and the cabinets combined, because we don't really need to see inside the drawers for texturing, and we just kind of automatic map those, right? So that they're all kind of not overlapping on top of each other. So remember that. And we want to send them one at a time, because I want this to have its own unique texture, and I want this to have its own unique texture. So I select kind of the desktop here, and we go File, and we're going to go Send to Mudbox, right? File, Send to Mudbox. Send as new scene. That's going to take a minute because it's going to have to open up the Mudbox. If you don't see File Send to Mudbox, you might be working in two different years, right? You might be working in Maya 2018 and Mudbox 2019. You should have both the same years, right? Both Maya 2019, Mudbox 2019, or Maya 2018, Mudbox 2018. So it's kind of important that you have both years there. Now, if you ever see this, sometimes I've noticed that this can happen with Mudbox. We'll give it a minute to see if it's going to load up. I've sometimes just found you can kind of minimize Mudbox, right? And then kind of bring it back up and it shows it. It's just a weird bug I've seen sometimes with Mudbox. So sometimes if you see a black screen in the actual viewport, just minimize Mudbox and then maximize it back out, and you'll see it takes care of itself. It's kind of a weird graphic display driver issue that's not fatal. So I'm going to go back to Maya, and I'm select the drawers, right? Because you saw that the first thing went over there. So we're going to go File, and we're going to send to Mudbox, but we're going to add this one to the current scene, right? Because we already have Mudbox open, and there's already a new scene with the desktop and legs in there, right? So we want to add to that current scene. And there we go. Now what's great about that is you can do that anytime you want to, right? So I could actually work on this without the drawers in there. Maybe I'm still UV wrapping the drawers, and I could always send those over at a later time, even the next day. Just as long as you open this scene with whatever you've been doing on this one, you can add to a current scene. So that's the only thing you have to be aware of with the add current scene in Maya is that there has to be a Mudbox scene open that you can add to. But it's a neat feature. It's pretty cool. There is a quick key for fit all, or fit selection, I should say, in Mudbox A, right? And it looks like it's working more like a fit all right now because I don't really have anything specifically selected. And that is in the display menu, right? You'll see there's a frame selection, A. There is actually an F function in Mudbox also called focus, F for focus. And that's actually based on the cursor, right? So wherever your cursor is pointed at, you'll see that that kind of sets the camera rotate and zoom on the brush itself. The brush size determines how much it zooms in. If it's a really small brush size, it'll zoom in quite close. If it's a more medium-sized one, it'll kind of zoom in less closely. But it will set your camera rotate around that focus area, which is kind of neat, right? Now remember, Mudbox uses Alt-Left, Alt-Middle, and Alt-Right, just like Maya does, right? So all your functionalities there, right? Alt-Left, Alt-Middle, Alt-Right, but all these are in here. Now in this case, since I've got all my objects in, we might as well go File and Save Scene As. And you see I kind of already have one created. Just kind of doing a little bit of test on it. So I've got kind of a Mudbox file for desk, right? So we'll hit Save. There we go. And there we go. So remember, save your scenes, right? Save Scene As, right? Give it a proper name so you're not overwriting anything else. You can easily, if you want to, put it in your actual main kind of projects folder, right, that we created the other day. And of course, Control S can save as you go, so you don't have to keep saving scene as. You say Control S when you want to save some stuff, right? All right. So remember, one of the big things we want to do is we want to set layers up for these objects, right? Do some painting. So I'm going to go to the right side of the menu here, right? Because we have these kind of three little tabs on the side. Layers, which is where our layers will go. Object list, viewport filters. You can ignore viewport filters, but object list is important and layers are important, right? So object list, you'll see there are our objects in there, right? There's a lot more than just our objects. There's our cameras, those are our viewports, if we wanted to switch to them and stuff like that. We have our materials, even a basic directional light. That stuff you can generally leave alone, right? It's the objects we want to play with. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to select the drawers, kind of get that one started up for us. Now, I've selected that, but I don't really want to see the other one for right now. So remember, there is the lock column, and you can click on that, and there's a lock that appears now, and that locks the other object so you can't edit it. So I'm going to unlock it though. But you see there's that big kind of white dot, right, in the eyeball column. That's your visibility. So I can click on that and see how it becomes kind of empty, and that will make sure that the rest of the other object is not visible. So that's what's great about object lists. And that's what we're usually going to use object lists for, is just selecting our objects, locking them, or turning the visibility off. That object's still selected though, right? See how I've still got it selected, it's still yellow. I'm going to switch from object list to layers. Now there is a sculpt button and there is a paint button, right? We want to use the paint button, not the sculpt button, because we're just painting stuff on our models. Now, once that paint button's on, I can create new layers. Now, you can get to the new layer feature by just, you see this kind of three little white kind of pages right here? That's your new layer. But right above that, you'll see there's a little bracket, right? It's kind of like a white dot with a little kind of bracket in it. If you click on that, you'll actually see there's a new layer there also. But there's a lot of other options. And we'll be talking about many of these later on in later lectures. But for right now, just kind of those three white pages, click on that. Here's our new layer, and we'll just call these drawers, right? So we want to give it a name, distinguish it from the other layer we're going to create. Size is for how many pixels, right? So you can click on that, and there's presets here. The 2048 should be fine, but you see there's 496, 8192, 1024. And that's really just saying that's 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels, right? It'd be like if you did image size in Photoshop. You're just saying this is how many pixels I want my texture to be. It does make them square, right? So that is 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. Right below that is Save As, and this is the file format it's going to say, TIFF, right? You see there's PNG. If you click on that pull down, there's Photoshop, there's Targa, there's even OpenEXR, which is ILM's proprietary file format. You also notice there's these things like 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit. That's really the bit depth, right? That means you get 8 bits of information per channel. So for the PNG here, 8-bit, it'll be 8 bits for the R, 8-bit for the G, which is green, 8-bit for the B, which is blue, 8-bit for the alpha. 16-bit, you get 16-bit for the red, 16-bit for the green, and so on and so forth, right? 32-bit, 32-bit for red, 32-bit green. And what that does is that basically makes the file size bigger, but also there's more information per channel, so it can make a higher quality texture. Probably the most noticeable thing is you'll often see that your transition between different colors often looks smoother and cleaner. But we're going to stick with TIFF 8-bit because it's default. There's no right or wrong with bit depth. Like I said, the great benefit of a lower bit depth like 8-bit is it's going to be a smaller file size. So when that's a consideration, you go with lower bit depth because you want your file size for your texture to be smaller. ILM, they're going to use 32-bit because they're working on movies. So there's no right or wrong on what your bit depth is. It just depends on what the needs of your what your pipeline are, right? So, but the defaults for all this stuff should be fine. I just like to talk about bit depth a little bit. Channels, right? Right now it's the diffuse, which is your color channel. We're not going to use that many of these here. We're going to see some incandescents and some bump maps on some later stuff. But diffuse is our color. And that's what we want to paint. We just want to do color maps for the desk, just like we did for the end table. So I'm going to hit OK. And we now see there's a layer. Great. Now, I don't want this yellow though, right? That just means the polygons are selected. Yellow usually indicates you have some polygons selected. So remember, if you go to Edit, there is Deselect All, right? And that basically deselects those while still keeping your layer available to paint on. So kind of just one of those nice little things to just keep in mind, cognizant about. If you see a little bit of weird shading here, that's sometimes just that the smooth shade in Mudbox is not that great. So you can always go to display and you can just turn smooth shade off if you don't want to see that. You will see that your bevels will look kind of faceted. So kind of pick your poison a little bit on that, right? Doesn't affect the actual texture itself. It's just kind of what the shading looks like on the model in Mudbox. So now this is our first layer, right? We've only got one layer. It's right now empty. And that's not a good thing, right? Any empty pixels, particularly if they're in the areas UVs are at, they will not show up when you bring this texture over to Maya. And Maya will try to fill them in black. So we don't want empty pixels, right? So we click on Paintbrush, right? So down in the bottom left corner, Paint Tools, Paintbrush, right? Paint Tools, Paintbrush. Now I've already got a color picked here, and that's fine. But remember, you can click on that, pick whatever color you want. Strength 100 should be fine. That's where your brush size is at also. Of course, your bracket keys can control brush size. And if you hold down B and left mouse drag, you can control brush size that way also. So B, left mouse button drag controls brush size. But you can also just numerically type it or play with the slider. Now I want to flood paint this. So when we click on Paintbrush, you notice it brought up the properties for this brush, right? So this kind of area is where your properties for your stencils or your stamps or your brushes will show up. Now there's a slider here. You see how you can slide down, right? But also scroll wheel slide down as well on your mouse, scroll wheel on your mouse. And you see if we scroll down, right, there is an area called flood paint layer. So we're going to click on that. And what that does, that flood paints that layer so that every pixel is filled in. There's actual color information for that pixel. And that way when you take it to other software, in particular Maya, you're not going to have any pixels that Maya has to fill in with black, right? It'll go in and it'll look just like you're expecting it to. If you don't do this, at least for your lowest layer, the bottom layer, it'll come in often weird to Maya. It'll look a lot darker because Maya is trying to fill in halfway transparent pixels or pixels that don't have any color information, that are basically empty. We don't want that. So that's why it's always a good idea to kind of flood paint your base layer. Any layers you create above it, you don't have to worry about that, right? And we'll do a little bit of layer work on some of the later videos. All right, so that's flood painted. But remember, what we want to do is we want to paint an image on here. We don't want to just paint color, right? Color by itself, just like this, is often boring, and you don't even have to paint a texture for that, right? That can be done with materials in Maya. So what I want to do is I want to paint a texture. Now, we have stencils here, right? Kind of the bottom right corner, there's stamps, there's stencils. You have off, right? So if you want to turn your stencils off, it's really easy to turn off just by clicking on the button that says off, right? But you'll notice there's a lot of images here that Mudbox comes with. You're free to use those. However, they might not be what you want. So if you want to add your own stencils, in the stencil menu there is kind of that little kind of white button with a bracket. I click on that and there's an add stencil button. And what that'll do is that'll just add a stencil right in here. Now, if you start to build up a halfway decent texture library, you've got dozens of textures, you might find it easier to use Image Browser. And that's in the top left corner here, right? 3D view, right? That's this view. UV view, which shows your UVs and their texture, and you can see it's kind of flood painted, so all of the layers got that colored pixel in it. And the third tab is Image Browser. Now you'll probably remember this from the last video because, well, we did do it on the last video, right? This is mostly the same stuff we did last time. Now, if you want to, and you've started to build up a texture library, what you can do to load it into Image Browser is you'll see there's kind of this white folder that looks like it's opening. It kind of looks like those Manila folders, and it looks like it's opening, but it's colored white. So you click on that, and you could browse for your textures at, right? So I can go there. This is where I've got my texture saved at. I can go to the textures folder, and you notice I'm not opening the textures folder, right? Because I've got a bunch of other folders inside of here. I've got dozens of other folders inside of that one. In fact, you'll see there's like basically 1.5 gigabytes of texture information in that folder. So I just click on the textures folder and then I say select folder. And you'll notice when I do that, now it's going right there in that directory. And here's all those other folders with specific textures in there, right? I've got one for buttons. I can open that up. There's buttons in there. If you want to go back out, right next to the white page is a folder. There's another folder, but it's got a little blue arrow. That goes back up one, right? Now in this case, I'm going to scroll down because I do have a folder with wood right down here. So I'm going to double click on that. And that opens this up and you can see there's some wood textures. Now in this case, you might be asking, well, where do I get these textures from? Guys, like I said the other video, you're going to have to find your own textures, right? You can do it with your phone, right? You can take pictures of your camera phone, download on your computer. You can sign up for a free account at textures.com, right? The free account does only give you 15 tokens a day, which basically means you can roughly, it's usually a token a texture, so you get about 15 textures a day. And it does give you the lowest resolution versions, which are still usually roughly about 1500 pixels, so they're still good texture quality. But you will notice you can get much higher resolution ones if you sign up for the premium account. Guys, don't. It's a pay account, right? So use the free account. Those textures, though, that you get from textures.com are copyright, they're royalty free, as they say. So what you can do is you can actually use them for your educational stuff without having to worry, but you can even use them professionally, right? You can actually use them to paint models with, and you're fine there too, right? If you do Google searches textures, look for copyrights, look for watermarks. If you see that, don't use that texture, right? You're safest using textures.com or just using your phone to make your own, to take pictures for your own textures. So I'm going to click on this plywood, and you see a texture really is just an image, right? These are JPEGs, right, guys? Now, once I click on that, that's the one I want to use. You'll notice that there is a white S over here. There's actually one that looks like a joystick. That's for stamps. We'll look at that later. But you'll see there is a white S. That is set stencil. So we click on that, right? And I'm going to go back to 3D view. And if you don't see it yet, just go back to image browser, click on that white S again, go back to 3D view, you'll see it. Sometimes you just have to do it twice. My box is a little flaky sometimes on that stuff. So if you don't see your stencil come up, go back to image browser and just hit that white S again for stencil. So I go back to 3D view, right? So it's these tabs up here. Now you notice that this stencil is looking gray. That's because right now paintbrush is on. Projection brush is what stencils are made to work with. In fact, you see when you hover over it, it says the projection paint tool must be used with this stencil. So we click on projection brush, and you'll now see our wood shows up normally. Now, one of the things that was interesting about our last one, our end table, is that when we painted, our projection brush color was, so I'm just going to click on projection brush because it brings up the projection brush properties here, was white. So if your color for your projection brush is set to white, it will paint exactly the image. What's really cool though is if you actually set your color to non-white, so I can click on this and maybe I'll make it even a little darker than this, it'll actually tint it, this color, in that kind of darker value. Now, word of warning, the darker the color gets, the closer it gets to black, the more it's going to tint the stencil kind of into oblivion. Like if you pick the color black, it will just paint the color black. You won't see your stencil. So usually kind of mid to lighter colors for tinting. But in this case, the stencil's on. The projection brush is on. We picked a color to tint it. And remember, projection painting is painting from the camera, right? So when you paint from the camera, it's going to paint exactly how you're seeing it, right? The polygons that are facing away, right, that are facing upward, right, those are going to get like a smear effect, right? So if I just go in here and I willy-nilly paint here, you'll see that, one, it's going on great for my front, which is fine. That's exactly what we wanted to do. You'll see it's going on darker, right? So I'm just holding down the left mouse button, right? And I'm just moving my brush, and it's painting exactly whatever part of the texture is in the stencil. But you'll notice if I look at the top here, I'll move my stencil over a little bit. See how it's smearing that? That's because those polygons were facing away from the camera. Remember, your projection painting is painting from the camera itself, right? So any polygons that face away from the camera, it'll paint, but it'll paint weird. It'll paint smeared. So you need to rotate your camera around to paint the different sides. Now remember, with projection brush on and a stencil on, you'll see these quick keys here. Now I've noticed hide stencil's a little broken right now, so I wouldn't use Q. It tends to not allow you to bring it back easily. You have to kind of go reselect it through image browser or through stencil menu. But remember, S left mouse button will rotate your stencil, S middle will move it, and S for stencil, right mouse button will scale it. So just like navigation where it's Alt left, middle, right, for stencils it's S left, middle, right. You see I can just kind of paint on the side here. Now we are going to talk about 2D painting in later videos. Usually 3D projection painting is the better option because it paints over seams. You're seeing exactly how it's going to look on the model. But 2D painting has its uses as well. We'll kind of talk about that on basically our pillows and our blankets when we get to it. Now you see I'm being very careful not to paint out here, right? To just kind of paint right there because I don't want that texture smearing to occur. So just be a little bit careful in your 3D projection painting. Kind of be aware that the more the polygons face away from the camera, the more the normal directions face away from the camera, your painting might go on weird, right? It'll look smeared. Because projection painting is technically 2D painting where you're projecting the pixels from the camera itself, just like an actual projector does. So there we go. And that's good for that one. I can save. And now what we can do is we can go and we can paint the other objects. So I'm going to go back to object list. Right? So instead of layers, I'm going to go back to object list here. And I'm going to turn the eyeball on for the legs on the desktop. And I'm going to turn the eyeball off, right? The eyeball column for the drawers. And I'll make sure to select the desktop legs. We'll go to layers, right? So switch from object list to layers. And you see layers are empty, right? That's because we haven't created a layer from this. We only created a layer for that other object. So we'll just click on those white pages. Remember, you want the paint menu to be open, right? So sculpt paint. So we'll click on those 3 white pages. And we'll call these, say, desktop legs, maybe. And the default should be fine, 2048, TIFF 8-bit, diffuse. Because we're only doing color maps for this one, right? We don't need bumpiness for it. We don't need glow. Even the shininess that this object would have, it's kind of a general shininess that we can have, we can handle without a texture map. So there we got that layer created. And of course we don't want the yellow to show up because that means there's polygons selected. So I go to Edit, Deselect All, and there we go. Now in this case I'm going to go back to my paintbrush layer, right? Because I want to flood paint this, right? It's our first layer, it's our only layer, it's going to be our bottom layer, we want to flood paint it. So click on paintbrush, and we can scroll down to the flood paint, right? Yay, flood paint layer. So it's always good to kind of do that. So flood paint. Now we're going to go back to projection brush, because we're going to be using that to paint some wood here in a minute. And I'm going to go back to image browser, select that wood again, click on the white S. There we go. Back to 3D view. And just like I said, sometimes you won't see it, so you might have to kind of go back in here, click on the white S again. There we go. In this case, you'll see how it's off actually also. So remember, the moment you click on that white S, usually you'll see the stencil properties here, and you just need to make sure that it's on, right? So there it is. Now I'm going to go back to my projection brush because I don't want to tint this color this time. So I'm going to go back to color, and I'm going to set it back to white. And we'll just kind of rotate up to here. And you notice your stencil doesn't kind of rotate with it. It doesn't scale with it. S right if you want to change the size a little bit. We'll just paint these. There we go. Hold down B for brush, left mouse drag, right? B for brush and left mouse drag. Make your brush a little bigger. And you see how it paints this wood at a lighter color than what we did on the drawers. So that's one of the neat things I want to show you here. This is mostly the stuff we did in the last video, but color can tint it, right? White will paint it exactly as it is. Any color you give besides that will tint it. The darker the color though, the more you lose the stencil, the more the color takes over. Black just paints black. Alright. Now in this case, I want to be able to isolate, right? I'm going to turn that stencil off in a moment. I want to be able to isolate, right? You saw I kind of got a little bit of wood paint on the legs. How do I isolate these legs so that I don't paint those? Or that I can paint these without painting the top. Because they're one object, right? If we go to object list, they're one object. Well, there is a way to do this, right? This is kind of the other thing I want to show you guys today besides just tinting color. Now, our paint tool's right here, of course, right? It's that bottom left corner tab. A couple over from that tab is the select move tools, right? So it's kind of these bottom tabs, paint tools, select move tools. In there, you'll see there's faces. I'm going to click on that, right? Faces. And you'll notice it has some of its options. The defaults are fine for now, but it's set to paint or drag select, much like Maya's would work. There's a lasso select, there's a pick marquee box select, just like Maya's. Now what's really cool, believe it or not, is when you're in face mode, you could do a select connected just like Maya. Now Maya, remember, double clicking on a face, right? So if you're in face selection mode, you double left click, it'll select the connected faces. And since these are one object, but they're not merged or bridged, right? They were just combined. They're not properly connected even if they're one object. So I can hold on Shift, because remember, Shift is add. Shift double left click, Shift double left click, Shift double left click, Shift double left click, right? Shift double left click, and I can select the rest of those. I can then go to display, right? So way up here, the top menus, display, and there's an isolate feature. This is just like Maya's isolate, right? Maya has that isolate selection. It's kind of the blue dotted line with the white cursor. This does the same thing. You check it on, and it just shows what you have selected. Now in this case, we don't want the yellow, so I'll just click off anywhere that's not on the objects, or Control D. And we can go back to Paint Tools. We'll turn Projection Brush on, right? Set the color to white, that's fine for us. I'm going to go to Image Browser. Although remember, if you want to, and you're not using Image Browser yet, the stencil menu here, kind of the white dot, little brackets, you can add stencil there, right? But in this case, I've got a bunch of texture, so let's go to Image Browser, right? So up at the top left corner. I'm going to grab this red, just like we kind of did with our end table, or sorry, not red, but blue, right? Kind of a washed out blue. Select that, white S for stencil. Go to 3D view, there's our stencil. In this case, I'm going to make my brush a little smaller so I can paint this a little nicer. So I'm going to hold down B for brush, left mouse drag, right? B for brush and left mouse drag makes it small. S middle, you can move your stencil, right? S middle mouse button. And I can just get in here and I can paint this stuff. Actually, I'm going to make that brush a little bigger than that. And I can paint this pretty quickly. Now you notice I'm going to hold Alt left to rotate my view. Just to kind of paint it from the different views here. And you notice that the stencil stays where you last left it. So it's pretty easy just to move your camera to get different views for how you want to paint this stuff. And you notice I'm trying to be careful about not painting too much kind of on the weird angles, right? We kind of just want to try to paint right on the polygons we're seeing. Otherwise you get that smearing effect. There we go, paint this. I can hold down S middle, right? S middle mouse button, and I can move this over here to paint a little bit. S middle mouse button, go over here. There we go. I'm not going to worry so much for mine for the back here. It depends on where you guys are putting your stuff at. But I'm just trying to paint what I'm going to see, basically. There we go. Remember, S middle will allow you to move your stencil. And of course, Alt left and Alt middle will allow you to move your camera. And we just kind of quickly get in here and kind of paint these from kind of the different views and angles. We can zoom our camera in, of course. Paint that one a little bit. S middle, right? S middle mouse button. You can move the stencil itself. So sometimes you might not always want to move your camera. You just want to move your stencil. Remember, Alt middle will move your camera. And S right can scale up, right? So in this case, I'm closer, so I can scale it back up. And that should allow us to get a pretty good paint job on those. I'm not worried about getting the backs because I'm not going to see them, and as the teacher, I don't have to paint every part of it, right? So I'm going to hit stencil off, and we can go back to object list. We can turn the eyeball on for the rest of it. And you notice it's not showing the tabletop. That's because I also have to go to display, right? Display menu, isolate to uncheck that, and object list eyeball. And then we kind of bring the visibility up for everything. Let's give it a second here to catch up. And there we go. And save that really quick, and that is our desk.